I want to jump into the flip side of it before we go any further, and give me kind of your take in your definition of success, and then how do those success and failure kind of intertwine?
Well, I mean, I think success is very much, I mean, how you define success anyway is very much something that's a personal thing. I don't think there's one success for anyone. I mean, if you ask someone in sort of a third world country, their definition of success is going to be way different than ours.
Yeah,
Um, but, I think generally speaking, it's probably safe to say that success for most people is just being happy, right? I mean, if you can reach happiness, whatever that means, that could be gobs of money. It could be, the freedom of being able to make your own choices and not have to, listen to someone else tell you what to do 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, um, or whatever else it is. I mean, I think everyone has different measures, but I think happiness is probably the ultimate goal, right? At the end of the day, I mean, people want to make, $100 million because they think that'll make them happy, right? Because they'll buy stuff. Um, and I think someone who puts that a little bit more, or talks about that a little bit more eloquently, was Chris Sacca, and he's a VC, pretty well known VC from lowercase capital. He recently was a commencement speaker at I think it was the University of Minnesota, and that's a video worth watching because he talks about happiness. It's just something that probably a lot of entrepreneurs are driven by, right? I mean, they didn't want to be, sort of stodgy or unhappy in a cubicle. So they sort of went off on their own and wanted to build something and have, sort of full control over it. The money was sort of a side thing. But he talks about it a lot, and sort of not just about that happiness is a goal, but sort of different ways to achieve it. So I think for me, that's definitely true too. I mean, success to me is probably, having the freedom of being able to make, my own choices, right? What I work on, when I work on it, things like that. That's sort of my goal, and that's sort of what I'm working towards.
yeah. So how does, I guess, if you, or what I've found is that failure and success are not always the polar opposites of each other. And at least that's what, from the interviews that we've done, that's what has kind of become evident. Do you feel like that's the case for you, or is it? I guess I'll preface that by saying that some people have definitely said that, yeah, I mean, failure is pretty much the polar opposite of my definition of success. But for a lot of folks so far, that hasn't been the case, because it's been, well, no, I guess if I don't fail at, or if I don't necessarily achieve, X happiness, that doesn't necessarily, or X success, that doesn't necessarily mean I failed because I tried, kind of thing. So how do you view that connection between success and failure?
Yeah, well, I would definitely lean towards saying that they're definitely not opposites. I mean, I think failure, you sort of have to take into a lot of accounts, right? I mean, you have to have a perspective as to what failure is and what you did during that time of failing, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, failing still sucks, right? I mean, I'm not.
Yeah,
I mean, there's no good way to put it. I mean, it's not a good thing. But I mean, sometimes you have to look at what your alternatives were, right? I mean, if you started a company, launched a company, spent a couple of years working on it, what were your alternatives, right? Maybe after those 3 years you failed, right? Whatever that means. Maybe again, you got to the end of the road and realized that whatever that destination you were trying to reach was sort of too far away, or you just weren't able to get there. Um, but what was your alternative, right? I mean, you could have spent those 3 years working for someone else, building up no real personal equity in yourself in terms of your own brand or knowledge or capabilities. Um, so I mean, I'm not sure which is more of a failure. I mean, if you spend 3 years sort of doing the same thing in an office and being unhappy, or spending those 3 years building something, even though it may have ended, in a failure, and maybe you're starting over, but I bet that person is probably sort of further along in sort of personal development after those 3 years, and that person who sort of just sat back and kind of just did his job, went along and did sort of his normal routine. Um, so I mean, one is failed and one didn't. I mean, it's kind of so it's obviously not opposite. I mean, you can't say one is a total success, a roaring success, and the other isn't. Um, so I mean, they're definitely not opposites. I mean, but again, I mean, in terms of what's better, I mean, you could definitely say failure sucks and success is really good. So in that sense, they're opposites. But in terms of like, if you sort of think through the period of time that you spent failing and this period of time you spent succeeding, you have to kind of weigh, what you did there, what you learned, I mean, and what the alternatives might have been during those periods, and whether that path that you took, even though it eventually failed, was better than the alternative.
Yeah. Brian, you keep on talking about, you keep saying things like, I don't know which failure is worse or which one's better, or, and you keep saying good and bad. And it's really interesting because I haven't gotten that kind of perspective from anyone yet. So I was hoping you could elaborate on, I guess, how you view the kind of spectrum of what's a worse failure or better, or, a better failure, and what's a, and even it's gonna go into the side of what's a good and or better success even. So do you feel like you could elaborate on that, or is that too kind of really meta?
Well, it's a little meta.
Yeah.
But, I think in terms of, I guess you can look at sort of two paths, right? You can have someone who, spent 2 or 3 years working on something, started a company, maybe it was a web product or, some other type of startup. And then at the end of that time, it may have led to a failure, right? He could have started going sideways. The product didn't find a market fit. Whatever the reason was, went off on a different road to do something else. And you could take someone else who may have done, went to the office, did a typical 9 to 5 job. At the end of those 3 years, they didn't really fail, but probably didn't move as far along personally in sort of personal development as that person who sort of failed, right? So, I mean, which one is more of a success and which one is more of a failure, right? I mean, the person who technically failed after 3 years, but accomplished way more than that person would have done otherwise if he just went to the office, or that person who maybe had an idea but sort of didn't pursue it, and then after those 3 years, sort of in the same place, may have a little more money in his pocket than that person who failed, but certainly isn't as far along in terms of skills and knowledge and ability as that person who technically failed. So again, I mean, they're definitely not polar opposites, success and failure. And you sort of have to take some perspective as to which one is truly bad and which one is truly good.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cool measurement based. I mean, essentially is you're saying, I guess, whichever one. I mean, in some respects of wisdom and experience, you come out on top. It's going to be the way to measure and say that this one ended up better than the other one.
Yeah, I mean, because you can't really truly say until you're 90 years old on your deathbed, right?
Right.
I mean, you could say that at the end of everything, you failed because you didn't follow your dreams, I guess, to use that sort of cliche. But,
right.
Is that a bigger failure? Probably. I mean, yeah. I would say that if you didn't do what you really wanted to do and you didn't pursue that, that's probably going to be at the end of the day a bigger failure than if you did pursue something, and, you learned a lot, because no matter what, you're going to learn a lot. But it didn't work out. You ended up doing something else. Which one is the bigger failure?